Like, one of my favourite things in Mass Effect 1 was the ammo system with the thermal clips, where you could use all these kind of fascinating mods that did different things. I was a big fan of the explosive one, and when you shot your gun, it increased a heat gauge, and when the heat gauge got to the end, it overheated, and then you had to wait for a cooldown period. But if you didn't, you could shoot feasibly without ever reloading. And it was this wonderful balancing act of damage versus utility versus, practicality on using your weapons well. It was a very fascinating way to deliver ammunition, and I'd played no game that tried to be creative with ammo at all. So to me, that was a really cool concept, and I had a lot of fun with it. And of course, I had my favourite systems where I'd put, like, explosive round on a shotgun, I'd knock somebody down with the shotgun's explosive round, overheat my gun, and then I'd elbow them when they were on the ground, and if there was a ledge, I'd push them off the ledge by elbowing them. And I had a fantastic time doing that, because it was ridiculous. And then in the later games, they went towards this kind of ubiquitous ammo source, which was these weird, like, codec film that you popped into your gun, and then they healed every gun's ammunition, so it was just like, oh, there you go, reload every weapon with this handy little piece of Deus Ex Machina. And then we come to this game, and it uses kind of a fundamentally similar system of, there are these ammo packs on the ground, and when you go near them, they replenish your gun. And I just don't find that to be as interesting. And to me, when a game has a mechanic on the first one that is kind of different to the usual, why the hell wouldn't you run with it? Why wouldn't you go towards that? Do you think it was too confusing for players to understand that they didn't have to find arbitrary ammo pickups? Like, look at Uncharted. Uncharted is one of the most sophisticated third-person shooters when it comes to technology, yet they still have you scouring the battlefield, mashing triangle to arbitrarily pick up weapons to reload your guns. They don't have automatic ammo pickups. They don't have like a box that's ammunition that just tells you go to this box and you're fine. There's none of that. It's literally pick up 1,000 Berettas to fix your Beretta. And I never understood that. These are the people that innovated that train level with all that shit happening at the same time with wonderful technology. The same people that did that water sequence in Uncharted 3 with all that wonderful technology. Insert fantastic set piece of technological marvel that literally set an industry standard at the time. And then you have the most arcadey, arbitrary, contrived, old school mechanic when it comes to ammo. It's confusing. It's interesting, but it's weird to me. Oh, by the way, guys, focus on the turret first. The turrets can kill you in 2 shots on Insanity if you're unlucky. And also, be careful of the Scourge here. If you go into the Scourge is also going to damage you an incredible amount. So be very careful as I break that piece of cover. So if you were wondering if that cover was good, it was not. There are only certain pieces of cover that cannot be broken, and they're generally the architectural ones, so use those instead. The flimsy, it looks like a piece of cover, is generally bad cover. But what are a couple of other things that they kind of had in the old games that this game has stripped away? I suppose a lot of people are going to say things like interesting dialogue and interesting missions, and think like, one of the weird ones for me, right, guys, is the car, the Nomad. So, if you never played Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 1 had a legendary vehicle called the Mako. It was essentially the best piece of design in any video game. It was a vehicle that just did not do what you wanted it to do, ever. They made the most perfect piece of just antithetical design you could ever make. A car that barely worked, regardless of instruction. And it's a marvel of technology when you think about it, that they could make something be so willfully bad for no other reason than just because. And it led to these wonderful moments of people generally not enjoying the Mako. Do you want to hear an unpopular opinion? I kind of liked the Mako. It was bad, it was really bad, it was ungodly bad, but there was a charm in the stupid shittiness of it. Like, figuring out how to navigate with that crappy car was a skill. It was not a skill anybody wants, but it was a skill that you could actually procure. And I did. I was pretty good in my Mako. I knew how to float up certain mountains that you didn't think you could climb, and I was good at, levitating so that I could fire one shot at a Geth Colossus in the distance and then falling back down and then levitating back up and repeating for 20 minutes. I knew what I was doing. And there was something about it where it was so bad and it was so consistently awful for so long. It was almost like the gimp of the family that's like, oh, bless him, kind of thing. And, I grew to understand it in a weird way, and I still hated it, but I was like, me and Mako are friends now, we're buddies, we've got past our initial problems with each other, and we've just learnt to cope. This game has a seemingly functional car that doesn't fucking work either. For no reason. Like, the car in this game thinks it works, and it does for about 60% of the time, and then you get to an awkward hill or incline, and then it just decides to do a spiritual homage to the Mako and not work right. And I don't know why it does it at all. About 90% of your time with the Nomad you'll have no issue with it, but that 10%, way more frustrating than the Mako ever was for me, because this is a car that does work, that should work, and there's no reason for it not to do what it's doing right now, and the only reason it's doing it is because it's being a dick. And you can upgrade the car to make it faster, and to make it do things a little bit better, and it does alleviate some of this. This is a puzzle, by the way, guys. You want to do a Z from this one. This is the bottom right of the Z, so go across, then go to top right, then go across, and then you'll do the puzzle. But the point is, they've made a vehicle that works, so it should work. There shouldn't be any of this weird nonsense to it, where it just refuses to go up certain hills, and it refuses to do certain things, and it starts falling backwards, even though the last time you did it perfectly fine. Like, all these weird angles to it. And then there's the changing between the different wheels to do hills as opposed to flats. They could have used this mechanic to be something really good. And the first thing I thought when I saw it, which I actually didn't see it my first time because I just couldn't go up a hill and I couldn't understand why, and it turned out that my microphone was blocking at the bottom left where there's the image where it shows you changing between the things, and because I was talking to Stream Chat I didn't hear the tutorial. But when I first saw it, I was thinking of something like Shadow of Mordor. In Shadow of Mordor, they had a traversal mechanic where when you hopped over any kind of piece of geometry, if you pressed A after landing, you got a speed boost, and it gave you this skill-based, interesting movement system to get through these environments. And the environments weren't the most interesting, so you just generally ran through them anyway, or rode an animal through them. So by giving you this movement option, it made moving interesting. And this is something I think all games need to move towards, the idea of skill-based movement, so that movement has a skill ceiling rather than just an arbitrary facet of the game. And I love this idea. So when I saw changing between the wheeled drives, I thought that if you swapped at the right time when you transitioned between those different altitudes, that you'd get a speed boost, and it'd benefit the car, and it'd reward you, and it'd be this skill-based movement where everything felt great, and you could move twice as fast in this car if you were good at assessing terrain and swapping at the right time, kind of like changing gears in a car, where, you know, you don't have to wait for the engine to grind itself to death. You can kind of understand that this is the time to change, and then through repetition and experience, you know when you should go into second and third and fourth and fifth, because in the end of the day it's going to save you petrol for one, and it's going to save your engine for two, and it's how to drive, isn't it? Well, that's what I wanted in this game, and it turns out it exists to make the movement less enjoyable. Oh, by the way, this is a nullifier, sorry. This enemy is going to shoot you through cover. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it knocks you out of cover. This enemy exists to put you into a bad spot so that other enemies can kill you. For the most, they're not bad. They're not that bad at all. But if they do that beautiful synchronicity, you can take a couple of cheap deaths. Because we're being attacked by the heaviest Revenant troop, which is that robot that's got the turret cannons. And all you want to do here is clear out the room before taking on the big fella, who's called a Destroyer. And the Destroyer, you can blow both his shoulder guns off, and it'll give a little bit of a stun on him. But you can shoot him anyway to do damage. And once you get his shield down, he goes down pretty quickly. But the car, at times, is just... it just doesn't feel very nice. It doesn't handle very well. Doesn't feel very fun to drive. Like, there's all those upgrades that you can give the car, and the only upgrade you want to give the car is a fucking gun, so you can shoot stuff. And if you've not played Insanity, you just don't know what it's like. But there are times when you'll drive past a Ket base, and the game will spawn in a bunch of Ket, they'll drop them from the sky, there'll be no ship, they'll just fall in, because they were supposed to be stood on the ground, and by the time you've gone past them, you've died, because they strip your car so quickly, with perfect aim and massive damage. And you can upgrade your armor to alleviate that a little bit, but it's just that moment of being like, the only thing I want right now is a massive fuck you cannon so I can turn around and say, you really want some of this? And you just can't seemingly do that. So it's this funny idea that they've brought back the car, they've tried to make it good, and indirectly made it shit, even though it's not so bad. And the one thing anybody wants to put on it is not several billion different shades of colour. It's not all these fancy wheel upgrades and boost upgrades and armour upgrades. It's the Demolition Man, you know. He's going for a gun. That's all it is. That's all Simon Phoenix is ever going to do. And that's all we ever wanted to do with the car. Let us put a gun on it. And admittedly, I don't know what's the plan for DLC with this game, but it will undoubtedly have one, because they all do these days. And I'm thinking that maybe there'll be DLC where perhaps you get armaments for the car. You know, maybe there's a racing or driving sequence later on that's quite important. Much to the way that... Didn't they add like a weird vehicle section in... Was it Lair of the Shadow Broker in Mass Effect 3 DLC? I forget which one it was. There was also one where they added a vehicle that could boost. I think it was called like the Firewalker or something. I didn't buy that one. I should really get like the Ultimate Edition of Mass Effect on PC with all the DLC, because I didn't play half the DLC for Mass Effect 3. I think I played it all for 2. I don't even think Mass Effect 1 had DLC outside of, was it Bring Down the Sky? Which was a fun one. I really liked that DLC. I just got burned, because when I bought it on Xbox Live, it went free the next day. That's just me all over that. Not happy. But we're now moving into probably the hardest sequence of fights in this level. Some could argue the game. The first one is up to you. You can skip it if you want to. Skipping it's not the easiest thing to do, but the checkpoint is also kind of shit. You're going to have to take on a massive room that never ends, basically. This room here is going to have both Revenant and Ket fighting each other, and it takes forever. It's about 20 to 30 enemies. There's big ones, there's small ones, there's shapes and sizes, and then past them is a doorway that leads into a boss fight against one of the Archon's like side fellas. And you might be wondering, oh cool, he's got, you know, some kind of boss, some kind of cool character. Who is it? It's just a bootleg Destined. They took a Destined, they coloured him blue, and he does exactly what the Destins do. Only the Destins have got bigger balls because he's a pussy and he runs away. And the fight itself is kind of like every boss fight in Mass Effect Andromeda. It takes generally a standard normal enemy that you can fight on any other planet, and then it puts it with 50 dudes that respawn at certain intervals during the fight. And I need to talk about this because it makes me profoundly angry. And you might be thinking, well, what was the point in getting angry about it, Chris? You can't change it. Well, maybe we can, guys, and that's the reason why I talk about this stuff so much. People seem to think that you can't get things changed. You can. By having a voice, and by speaking, and speaking in mass, you can get games changed. And a lot of the times, they change for the worse. And it's kind of sad that we have this thing that happens now. Games literally get nerfed and gimped and changed and altered because a vocal minority of players don't want to understand how to play them. They want to just get instant victory. And it makes everybody suffer as a whole, because those players are not looking to better themselves and become better players. They just want to get to the end and move on to the next game, or go back to FIFA or whatever. So they're not learning anything, and the people who are here looking for a challenge or are here looking to better themselves are not finding it because they've made it easier. And there's a fighting game t-shirt that I always think of, and it has on it like a bunch of stuff crossed off, and I forget exactly what it is. That's how memorable the shirt is. But it's essentially like, instead of complaining, instead of nerfing, adapt. And it crosses off all these alterations of what people do. But it's so true. And the fighting game, you know, community is just as bad as every community. They're all bitching. Go on event hubs. All it is everybody having an argument about what should be fixed and what should be changed and who's overpowered and why the game sucks dick and why you should never play it, yet they're all fucking playing it. Every community does this, guys. They go through these ebbs and flows of shit happening and not liking it and questioning it and what have you. But patches do happen now. Patches are a massive thing. The problem is, they patch the wrong things, I think. They patch the things that people talk about, and because people talk about them, there's this mass hysteria that they're all as bad as they are. Like, certain things are bad, and they need to be altered. But they don't need to be killed. And have you noticed that we don't do finesseful patches anymore? They don't take them, alter something slightly, or even better, take everything else and make that better so that the disparity between the great thing is not as wide as it was. Instead, they just kill the good thing. They kill the thing everybody's talking about. And a lot of the times, the difference between if a game has an online component and an offline component, the shit that the people offline are using is not the shit that the people online are using. So when they say one weapon is really overpowered, the other half of the community is like, what are you talking about? This is fine. But because they don't like it in PvP or they don't like it in PvE, it gets changed and it affects the other as well. And we're not at the point where we can do, you know, console-specific patches, online to offline-specific patches. I'm hoping that that's something that we iterate on because I think it's important. But it's not something that happens, so at this moment in time, the people with the loudest voice and the most repetitive forum posts are the people who get games changed. But unfortunately, it seems to be the people who don't want to get better. They're the people that want to win and have a tool that covers every single situation without them having to really apply their brain. And that's not good. Which is why that I commend people and I compel people to share your voice as well. Because if these people that just beg for an easier game and want to have everything their way, get their way, we all suffer. So we need to add a couple of voices into the discourse. And hopefully the devs will look at it perhaps from two different perspectives, when you've got one person saying it's like this and another group of people saying it's like this, instead of just listening to one of them. And it's very important, guys, because the developers need feedback. They want feedback. They don't want you to be like, oh, you're a dickhead, I hope you die, because that's not feedback, that's just you being stupid. They want valid criticism, valid praise, and suggestions. And they get hundreds of them. Absolutely hundreds of them, which means if you get a chance to be heard, you want it to be you at your most eloquent and you at your most, you know, analytical, so that they read it and they realise this is somebody who cares about our game, this is somebody who wants the game to be better and doesn't just want to dominate noobs in PvP or something. And it's important. So to swing this big tangent back to the boss thing, does anybody think arbitrarily adding minions to an inflated normal enemy constitutes a boss? Because I'd really like to know. And I'd like to hear your thinking on this and why you think it works and why you think it deserves merit and a place in a video game. Because I don't think it does. I don't think you can compare the bosses in this game to Saren. I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can even compare them to... what was the lady on Novaria? Was it Benicia? Tali's mum? She was a boss. She sucked. But she was a boss. Like, they were bosses. Actual bosses. And admittedly, they might have shared common traits with other people, but for all intents and purposes, they were bosses. And Mass Effect might not be the best example of this, but it's the one we're using because we're watching a Mass Effect video. Like, just taking a standard enemy and then having mobs with him and having him have a lot of life doesn't feel bossy to me. And I love bosses, I really do. Bosses are one of my favourite aspects of a video game. And I have really strong beliefs on what I think a boss should be. A boss to me is kind of like a test. It's a trial by fire. It's forcing a player to face an encounter that cannot be avoided, that cannot be lamed and cheated and cheesed. It's proving that you've taken all the tools that the game has given you to learn in that aspect of, in that part of the game, and that you can bring it all together and use it to such a level that you can overcome this barrier that has been set to prove that you deserve to see the next part of the game. Because if you can't, then you're not ready for it, and you haven't learned those lessons. But if you do, then there's a whole host of extra challenges waiting for you. And to me, it's a thing of beauty. It's this opportunity to do something vastly different to anything else that's been done up to that point. It is an opportunity to take that moment in time and build it and craft it in a way that you don't have to do repeatedly for the rest of that level or for the rest of that 15-hour campaign. It's a pocket of something different that happens every so often because there's other boss fights, of course, but isn't just the main focal attraction. And bosses are a great tool to break up the pacing of a game. Games are all about flow, and if you get that flow right, you have people up at 4 in the morning when they have to get up for work the next day, and they know they're going to be knackered and they know it's going to be a miserable day, but they also don't care because the game hooked them that much. You need them to to see the illusion instead of the mirrors. And if you can get that, then you've won it. You've beat them, you know, you've got exactly what you wanted. So that's the problem why things like checkpoints and things like bad bosses are so resonant with players, because they're only really remembered for being bad. Like, unless you're somebody who takes games to a further level and wants to improve and wants to understand and wants to study them, you're probably not going to look into what made a boss tick, or if you even thought it was bad. Like, there are plenty of bad bosses that are bad because you killed them before they've had time to be a boss. But people generally don't remember those ones because they don't think of it. You know, they don't look at it like that. It's just, oh, I killed that dude, that's cool, who's the next guy to kill? Whereas, if you're analysing a boss that should do a certain thing, and he doesn't do that, he's failed as a boss, fundamentally. Like, look at Sundowner in Metal Gear Rising. Or perhaps a better example would be Monsoon, even though Sundowner is definitely the same tree as this. The same logic tree. When you get against those two bosses, you have to know how to cut. The game is giving you a barrier to make sure that you can use Blade Mode. If you can't use Blade Mode, you're going to struggle on those fights because you can't mash through them. They have certain tenets to them that have to be done to prove that you have the capacity to face the further challenges. Sundowner is a massive one for that, but Monsoon is the first real one. If you can't do that and you can't understand that cutting certain parts is important and being able to do it quickly and expedite that process, you're going to be there a long time and you're going to think the game sucks because you're not doing it right. And games can suck for a million reasons, and we can think it's because the game's not working correctly, but 90% of the time, we're not doing it right. That 10% does exist though, and it must be explained, and it must be showcased, because games aren't perfect, guys. And if we all imagine that they are perfect, developers can get lazy and they'll release any old shit, and you don't want that. Believe it or not, critiquing things, valid criticism will lead to better games. Might not be what you want to hear, because you like listening to about, you know, sunshine and raindrops and all that fun stuff, and Fern Gully, but it is also very, very valid. So here is the fight. This is the boss. You're in a very big room that kind of has escalation to it that leads to that central cradle that we were just on, and then there's all these outcropping areas. The boss is just there. And do you notice how his life has skulls under it? If you see that, it generally means he's going to take a fucking beating. The last time I saw that, it was on a fight I couldn't win. And I think it's the game's way of telling you that his level range is a bit higher than yours. But do not fear. We have a very powerful shotgun, and this guy's a moron. So the fight goes as thus. Group of enemies spawn with the boss. Kill the group of enemies so you can focus on boss. Take down the boss's shield. Damage the boss to a certain threshold. He then goes invisible, runs away, and then an extra spawn of enemies will happen. There are 3 spawns of enemies. The first one's just a standard group, the second one's a slightly larger group, the third one is a fiend with a couple of other dudes. As long as you can stay on top of the spawns and kill them quickly before the Destined comes back, you'll generally not have too much of an issue. If you can get them all grouped together, you can hit them with splash damage, and you can kill them even quicker. The Falcon's great on this mission. I used it on my first run of Insanity, and it got me through this really well, because look how much they group up the Chosens. And look at them rushing too. These enemies love to rush, so you need to put them down, because if you don't and they start shooting, they will strip you in seconds. You will hear your team tell you that the boss has come back. And when the boss has come back, you need to be aware that he's really sneaky, so he will flank you from a multitude of directions. So you want to, obviously, focus on the enemies. That's the key to telling you that the boss is back. Do you see how it tells you to look? Don't look. It controls your camera. It's really annoying. Now the boss is back. Make sure no enemies are left, run around, get your ammo back, get your weapons loaded, and then get your team focusing on him, and then take off his shield, and then make sure you can hit him with the shotgun for damage. 2 shotgun shells and then some biotics should do some decent chunks off his HP, and then you will get to the hardest phase, which is actually not too bad as long as you kite it correctly. But I call it the hardest phase because I imagine it's what people believe to be the hardest phase. Personally, I think the one we just did is worse because of the Chosens rushing you. The Chosens are a nightmare. But there is one of the dogs. Put it down. There's the shotgun from that guy hitting me at an incredible range. And then you can see my team doing a fantastic job here of damaging this guy. The shotgun does a really good threshold, and then boom, he disappears. Next spawn. The spawn will always come from the door that you came in. So if you're in a strong position and you're ready for it, you can spawn kill quite a lot of them. But do you see how much the Chosens rush here? The Chosens are going to rush immediately for you. So get yourself to the back of this room, get yourself in cover, and try and just put something in the way of them and hit them as hard as you can, because they're going to overextend, and it's the best time to punch anybody. And that's what you want to be doing. So the boss is back. This is not the hardest phase, by the way. There's a phase after this. Even though, as I've mentioned, I think that these ones are harder than the final one. It's just the final one's intimidating because it's a fiend. So here's another Chosen rushing me. There's a guy from my left rushing me. I bounce him into the air. I sprint after him. I get the biotic. I'm going to put him down on the ground. Couple of shots to kill him. Make sure I can put myself in cover when anything's behind me. Spin around. And there we go. More Chosens rushing, but my team is taking care of them. We've got this under control now, but there's still a couple dudes left. So we want to be frugal with what we do. Oh, and here he is. Here is the fiend. So this was the wave. My bad, guys. So it's a bunch of Chosens and a fiend. As long as you get rid of the Chosens quickly, the fiend is not a problem. But you need to know that fiend will only come for you. He wants you. That's it. He lives to come for you. He will do whatever he can to get to you. It's one of those weird AI aggression things where he will ignore everything except for me. So all you want to do is, you can focus on killing the fiend if you want, which is what I would recommend you do. Just keep kiting the room, picking up the ammo, hitting it with the shotgun. It's got an incredible amount of HP. And then when he's done, the boss is on his own, and the boss is a big pussy. And this brings me back to what I was saying before, you know, with the whole... A boss needs to mean something to me to be a boss, and that's the strength of it. Like... This thing here has more HP probably than the boss does. That thing can kill you in one hit as well if you get unlucky. The boss can't. So in this scheme of the game, this enemy I'm fighting here is more of a boss than the boss is. And I really don't like the idea of a standard enemy cuckolding the power of a boss. A boss, to me, should always be the guy who stands out. It should never be the little shits in the room. But a lot of video games make that mistake. And it's one... Whoa, what is Drac doing? Drac? You just chilling? Oh no, you're moving, he's good. Like, I don't ever think the true danger of a boss fight, when there is more than one enemy in that room, should ever be the enemies. The enemies should be the thing that make it awkward, but it's the boss that should be the thing that makes it challenging. And I'm an advocate of not having ads in boss fights as well. I think there's a time and a place for adding enemies in boss fights, but majoritarily, which is not a word, but it sounded funny, didn't it? But for the majority, sorry, I don't think there's ever an excuse for it. I think it's just lazy, arbitrary difficulty, and it's something that should not exist. But thank you for watching. I hope that helped. Very long chapter, that one. It will be broken down into 2 videos so that it's not just 55 minutes of me rambling. But as always, you take care now.